the thing I've learned about military finance, right, is like the resources are there, but it doesn't mean that people are going to dig into them, and it doesn't mean that they're going to make the right decisions. I mean, I made arguably one of the best and worst decisions ever. I invested in the TSP. I made, 10% on average over that 7 years. And then I messed it up because I didn't understand the funds. I left it in the G fund, which is where it used to default.
Yeah.
And I always tell people that as my example of like what I'm doing. I'm like, dude, if one person had sat me down and said, let me see how your TSP is set up. Hey, why don't you try putting this money there? I would have had easily 3 times what I have now in it. That just not knowing the difference in funds literally cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars because I just did I did all the right moves and didn't know the difference in funds. And so I'm like, if I can just get one piece of advice to sink in with one vet and make them or save them a few thousand, 6 figures, whatever, like I'm good. I'm happy. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so I wish people had done that for me, and I'm just trying to give it back.
I love that mission and that vision that you have. So with that being said, what if you're just let's say you're an E5, or you don't have to. It doesn't matter what rank to some extent, as you've said. But if you were to start all over again, and you've said this in other videos, but what kind of a general advice would you give to an active duty member who wants to do what you are doing, basically?
Yeah, there's always context, but the first thing I would say right now is if you are in the blended retirement system and you're not contributing at least 5% to your thrift savings plan, you're making a huge mistake. And I don't care what anybody's going to sell you about how 401ks are dead, put your money with me or whatever. There is no investment that I know of on the planet where you can hand someone $5 and they will hand their own $5 in and say, we're so glad you contributed. We're going to do it too. And so to not have the matching contribution from the government is asinine. I mean, really. And unfortunately, people try to sell vet service members out of it. They're like, oh, there's so many better options. This, that. There might be a better option, depending on your skill set, than contributing over the matching contribution. Maybe, sure, I could get behind that argument. But I can't get behind the argument that anyone's going to outperform a guaranteed 100% return on investment day one backed by the government. Like, sorry, if there was an investment that could outperform that guaranteed day one, I would take that investment. But it's just not the case. So you should do that. And then you should really focus on education. There's a million ways to skin a cat, achieve financial freedom. There's the FIRE movement, which obviously in your name, right? You be as frugal. Well, there's multiple different ways to do FIRE. There's be as frugal as possible. There's fat FIRE. There's, there's also real estate investing, which I'm a huge fan of, but it involves more risk than some people are like. Some people don't like the idea of debt, and whether it's good debt, bad debt, doesn't matter to them. They don't like debt. Debt is risk. There's business, there's building a business, there's side hustles, there's, so I would just encourage whoever's listening, pick up a few books. You can read my book. Like you mentioned, I sell it on Amazon, but I also give it away as a PDF for free to anybody who wants it on my website. There's my book. There's, if you're interested in stocks, there's Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins. If you're interested in real estate investing, there's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. There's all the Bigger Pockets books. There's a million books out there. And I say books, there's podcasts, there's YouTube, there's whatever. Just spend some time. And I'm an audiobook fan. Like if I'm driving, spend some time that you're already doing not a whole lot and use it to educate yourself and figure out what kind of investment you like. And while you're doing that, just save some money because you're always going to be able to find investments down the road. And there's nothing that beats speed and or timing. And so the earlier you can start saving some money, the better off you'll be. And the earlier you can start learning about this, the better off you'll be. You really don't need to make any moves at an early age.
Yeah.
Some small contributions here and there will add up at an early age. It's funny, like, we get into our 40s and 50s, it's like everything matters. But at 18, 20, it's like, throw $10 at S&P 500, throw it at Apple, throw it at wherever. As long as you play the long game, you're going to win.
Exactly. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, so obviously you're big on real estate investment, but I was curious to see what you would say to an aspiring entrepreneur who may be a military veteran transitioning out, or I guess even active duty. One of my prior guests is an entrepreneur, and he's active duty, so it doesn't have to be when you get out. So, what are some tips and tricks that you would give to any military member or veteran who is trying to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, obviously all tactical advice is going to be dependent on strategy and business model and what niche and all that stuff. But, the biggest piece of advice I'd probably give anyone is uh, it's going to be a slog at first.
Mm.
I always joke that vets are uniquely positioned to be entrepreneurs because of all the BS we do in the military. And people are like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, when you stood duty for 24 hours, you didn't get any extra pay. When you got sent to the armory at 3 a.m., you didn't get extra pay for
Hmm.
those early hours. When you worked on a
Right.
Saturday because some schmuckatelli got a DUI, you didn't, you know. But now
Yeah.
you're working those extra hours for you, for your dream. And
Mm.
most people give up as soon as they realize that you're going to start off in the BMW phase, which is below minimum wage. You're going to work your ass off and you're not going to be
Yeah.
getting paid for it at first. Anything you start is like that. I'm launching a local podcast this next month, and I'm recording my first few episodes, and I'm fully aware that I will probably not get any views on those first few videos or
Yeah.
podcasts. And that
Yeah.
is fine because it's the long game. And so I would tell people that it's going to be a slog at first. Be ready for it. Make sure you can weather the storm. And if you don't give up, you'll be okay. Then all the cliche stuff, like really dig into what your niche is, your offer, what makes you unique. Focus on marketing, focus on providing value and giving value before you focus on receiving money. Like really make sure that what you're bringing to market or how you're serving the market is what your audience wants and needs, marketing to that avatar directly and providing that avatar with as much value as humanly possible. And then don't quit. And you'll be all right.
What kind of advice would you give when it comes to business funding? Like if you're an entrepreneur, you're starting out, because obviously, but business costs money. So, is there anything that you would recommend for veterans to kind of help them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously if you're buying a business, if you're acquiring a business, there's a lot of resources. There's SBA loans and there's business loans, there's local banks, there's credit unions, and they'll all play ball with you. Same with franchising. They make it a lot easier because you're buying an existing business model. If you are building yourself, the odds are you're going to need to bootstrap or give up something you probably don't want to give up. So I would encourage you to be able to bootstrap as long as possible, because you don't want to. You would much rather be like Sarah Blakely, who became a billionaire through Spanx and owned 100% of Spanx. She never
Hmm.
sold a piece. Than to end up, selling off 30-40% of your business to an investor, and then it becomes wildly successful and you gave
Mm.
away $300 or $400 million worth of valuation
Wow.
on day one, right?
Yeah.
And so I think you may not have funding. There's not a lot of banks that I know of that'll fund a brand new startup idea unless it's a franchise or you're buying a business. You can go to friends and family. You can do a loan, but I wouldn't do an equity loan unless it's like a small equity kicker. I would not give up your majority. I wouldn't give up equity unless you have to. I would do a profit share model or things like that to align employees or potential investors more so than equity. And I think that would probably be my thought, is like you can get very creative with it, but you're either going to need your own capital bootstrap, you're going to be working a slow roll, which is what I did, a
Mhm.
ton of free content with as little expenses as possible, or you're going to need to find money from somebody, and in that case try to do it without giving up much equity.
In your journey in entrepreneurship, what are some of the you look back on them, there were blunders, like things that you made mistakes on, which I know everyone does, but I'm just curious, like what was your most impactful blunder where you actually learned a big lesson from that?
Yeah, I mean, I've got two that always pop to mind right away. The first was I tried to go too big, too fast, too soon,
Yeah.
and I was set on trying to hit 50 units in a year acquiring. So I bought a property that was like 40 doors and it was mixed use, and I just never should have bought it. If I'd been playing the conservative game instead of the look how many doors I can buy game, I wouldn't have. And that property, unfortunately for me, was a guy running a lease option scam. And it took 4 years of litigation to get my money back. And I got
Wow.
my money back plus interest. It was
Yeah.
like whatever the IRS rate is, like 4%, return. But still, it was 4 years of time and hard lessons and everything else for nothing. I mean, I didn't
Hmm.
have a building to show for it. I didn't have a ton of cash flow to show for it. A ton of valuable lessons. The other one, I used a contractor that I'd never used before on a long distance flip. And I didn't have the right oversight, and he robbed me blind.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it wasn't terrible, but I basically lost 30 grand. And, those weren't exactly easy things to come by.
Sure.
But, on a military salary, 30 grand goes a long way. So,
Yeah. So on the flip side of that, what are some of your biggest decisions that you made, and maybe in hindsight too, but or just in general, that you felt like were really, really great decisions?
honestly, betting on myself, I most of my trying to say this in a way that just doesn't discourage people. While some of my best decisions have involved hiring, most of my biggest whoopsies have involved other people, whether
Mm,
that's the other party on the contract as the contractor, the other party on the lease option, or if it's somebody I never should have partnered with, or somebody I never should have hired. Um, some of my biggest lessons have been, hiring the wrong people or partnering with the wrong people or working with the wrong people. And so I guess I've just kind of learned like the more I trust my gut and lean into what I believe is the right direction, the better things seem to work out.
yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because ultimately, especially as a business owner, you are the commander. You're the general. You're the one in charge, and you call the shots, and you have full say in your. I mean, especially as a solopreneur starting out by yourself. But then, yeah, I guess I can see that being challenging whenever you start introducing other people into the fold, because you really have to trust them, and you really have to be on the same page, and like really find that's got to be tough to find and really vet those people. But obviously that's going to be a trial and error process to some extent, because when you're hiring somebody, you really just don't know exactly what you might be getting into. So yeah, that's it's really interesting to hear, and I appreciate you sharing that. If you could, I would like to just kind of hear maybe some of your success stories, maybe some of the like just the maybe not even just the numbers things, but just like some stories of people's lives that have been changed during this war room.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, oh man, it's funny because the reviews that I get or the feedback I get from people are incredible. Like, I guess one cool story is, I was hosting a barbecue at my house when I lived in San Diego, and I had a couple members over there, and my buddy Donnie, my buddy Adit were talking, and I let them know. I don't even remember how the conversation came up, but essentially they left that barbecue with a plan to combine their VA entitlement. One of them had income but no entitlement. The other had entitlement but no income. He had income, but it was commission based, and he hadn't had it for 2 years, so he couldn't use it for debt to income. And they bought a triplex in San Diego County together to house hack. And then, oddly enough, because of the pandemic, they couldn't evict the tenant who was supposed to move out so they could occupy. Wouldn't move out. They couldn't evict. It was this whole weird situation. They ended up being able to just sell it and wipe their hands like 7 months later, because they were like, well,
Wow.
we can't live here, so we need to find something else. And they turned a $350,000 profit in less than a year on a zero down VA loan.
Wow.
So that one's pretty cool.
Yeah.
More recently, this was a long time coming. About March or April last year, somebody dropped in the Facebook group that there was a off-market hotel, and they liked it, but they didn't know anything about hotels. So I tagged another member who does hotel purchasing, and he took it under contract. It was 130 keys in Townsend, Tennessee, right outside Smoky Mountain National Park. 130 door hotel with 3 pools, 2 hot tubs, and a wedding venue.
Wow.
It's eight buildings on like 12 acres or something like that. Super cool. And they took it under contract. Then they were needing some extra help raising capital, so I came in to help raise capital. We raised 4.4 million for this deal to take it down, and
Wow.
I'd say three of that, 2.5 or three of that, was raised through members of the war room, or members of the war room helping bring capital in. So the deal was found by a member, contracted by a member, raised for by a member, it's operated by a member, and it's probably got like 10 different investors in it that are in the war room. So I love that one because it's like the purpose of the war room was never for people to come in and invest together. It was for education and content and accountability and whatever. And I never want to promise anyone, if you join, we're going to just throw deals your way, or you're going to be able to partner with people. But it happens so much. Like, it's crazy to me that I don't even know, like, I'll be casually talking to someone and he's like, oh yeah, so and so lent me $100,000. I flipped this house. I made this. He made that. And I'm like, oh, I had no idea that was going on. Like, every month it seems I'm finding deals that members are doing together. Three of the members bought a golf course together.
Wow.
One of the guys he did his first real estate project outside of a home he lived in. Was he bought a vacant lot on the beach in Florida. Actually, yeah, I think it's still Florida. I don't think it was Alabama, but like that part, like the Panhandle, and built a house on it. Got the house appraised. He was like 1 million, 1.2 million all into this house. It appraised at like 2.7. So he pulled all of his money back plus, like, I don't know, mid to upper six figures, and it cash flows as an Airbnb. And so he was able to do this deal. He had a lot of cash saved up over years and years of whatever, but it was still his first ever real estate transaction. Made him $1 million cash on the refi after the build was completed, and he still owns the property. It still cash flows. Now he's doing another deal. Like, just super cool. So I guess those are probably three that come to mind right away, but there's, tons of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like the community really is looking out for each other, because they know that there might be an opportunity. Because I think the cash flow thing is interesting, because you might have like 10,000 sitting around ready for in an opportunity, but somebody might have 50,000. So is that kind of how you do it? You're like, oh, I'll chip in 10 and I'll chip in 50, and then you kind of like take a percentage of that, or how does that work?
It's actually interesting. One of the things that makes the war room unique is that nobody solicits in the group. And so nobody goes and says publicly, like, hey, I'm raising for this deal. If you want in, like, here's the details.
Yeah.
We try to make it not that way. But just by nature, people start to see, like, oh, I like this guy, I'm going to subscribe to his newsletter. I like this guy, and so I sent out emails talking about this deal, and I was just casually talking about it, and people were asking me. And then we'd bring them in. This one, it depends on the deal. Every deal is different. This one had a $50,000 minimum, but we did allow some of the members to invest 25, just because they were members. But it really just it depends. There are definitely deals where people will pull multiple people together in smaller amounts. It just depends on every operator. Personally, I would rather, from raising capital, I'd rather work with the guy that has $500,000 as the only investor than 50 people with $10,000. Or yeah, that's the right math. Because what happens is, when you take, as an operator, when somebody invests the only $10,000 they have, or it's their first investment and it's $10,000 and they've never invested that before, that's the person who's going to want an update like every single week. They're going to want every detail about everything. If you breathe funny, if you're sick, like, what's going on with the property. And the guy who puts you a $500,000 check and has $10 million doesn't give a shit. Like, you will never hear from him until you give him his money back. He'll be like, thanks, let's do it again. So I'm not personally a huge fan of trying to raise in smaller amounts, but that's probably going to change. I'm looking at launching a fund where people in the community can actually invest directly in the fund, and then I'll be able to pay them a return and go invest it in different deals. Still working through the logistics on that, but if I end up going that route, I'll open it up to smaller investments as a way for members of the community to get a return that's better than a savings account.